Okay, so get ready for this, because today we are diving into the deep end of San Francisco politics.
Ooh, exciting.
Right. We're talking about the surprisingly interesting world of San Francisco Board of Supervisors meeting minutes.
Surprisingly interesting. I think you mean totally fascinating. Minutes are like a secret decoder ring to understanding how the city really works.
Totally. I love getting a peek behind the curtain like this. And you sent over the minutes from 3 meetings back in June 2024, the 4th, 18th, and 25th.
Yep, those are the ones.
I have to admit, I was expecting some pretty dry reading, lots of legal jargon.
Oh, for sure. There's some of that in there.
But honestly, I was shocked. There's some serious drama hiding in these pages.
Oh, absolutely. We've got funding showdowns and hints of political maneuvering and even a case of the missing supervisor.
I know, right? It's like an episode of Local Government House of Cards. But before we get to all that, let's back up a minute for those who haven't memorized every detail of San Francisco's government like we have.
Right. Not everyone lives and breathes this stuff like we do.
Exactly. So remind us what the Board of Supervisors actually does.
Basically, they're the city's directors. They're the ones making the big decisions, passing laws, approving the budget, that kind of thing.
So they have set the course for the entire city.
Exactly.
And these meeting minutes, they're like the transcript of their big decision-making sessions, capturing every single vote, every debate.
You got it. Total transparency, which I gotta say is pretty cool, even if it does sometimes feel like you need a PhD to decipher it all.
Well, consider us the Sherlock Holmes of San Francisco politics, because that's what we do here.
Let's do it.
So let's get into it. Our first clue is the meeting on June 4th. The thing that jumped out right away was just how much money they're putting towards dealing with homelessness.
Yeah, over $50 million, which is a lot of money. But then again, homelessness in San Francisco is a huge issue.
It really is.
Oh.
So where's all that money actually going?
Well, a good chunk of it is going to some of the big players in the city's fight against homelessness, like Urban Alchemy and Episcopal Community Services.
Okay, so those are some familiar names. But what are they actually doing with all that cash?
So, for example, Urban Alchemy got a grant for over $22 million to run a shelter at 711 Post Street, which is a pretty prime location.
Right, I know that spot.
And they're also the group behind that 33 Ghost Street cabin program, those little individual shelter pods you've probably seen around.
Oh yeah, those cabins are definitely a hot topic.
To say the least. But it shows you they're trying different approaches. Then you've got Episcopal Community Services. They got funding for something called the Flexible Housing Subsidy Program.
Flexible housing subsidy.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of being tied to specific housing vouchers or something, they can use the money however works best.
Exactly. It gives them more flexibility to tailor solutions to individual needs, which makes a lot of sense because homelessness is such a complex issue.
Totally. But I'm guessing even $50 million can only go so far.
You're preaching to the choir on that one. And that's actually a perfect segue to our next set of minutes because the June 18th meeting gives us a sneak peek at the city's budget, and we get to see how much they're really planning to dedicate to these programs in the long run.
Ooh, budget talks. Those are always juicy.
Mm.
Is it too early to tell what their priorities are?
Well, the full budget details are still under wraps. But this interim budget, it's like getting a trailer for the big blockbuster movie. It gives us a taste of the city's overall financial health and what they think is worth investing in.
I love a good trailer.
Me too.
Okay, well, while we wait for that big budget premiere, what else caught your eye in these June minutes? Give me the highlights.
Well, besides trying to tackle the massive issue of homelessness, San Francisco is laser-focused on bouncing back from the pandemic economically.
I remember the city was hit hard.
No doubt about it. And we can actually see that in these minutes. In the June 4th meeting, there's a grant increase for SF New Deal.
SF New Deal. Now that name rings a bell. Remind me what they do again.
They were a lifeline for so many small businesses during those early pandemic days. Think restaurant delivery programs, emergency grants, all that good stuff.
Yeah.
They basically helped keep the lights on for tons of struggling businesses.
Oh, yeah. They were huge. So this grant increase means the city is serious about supporting those businesses for the long haul.
Seems like it. But it's not just about helping the businesses that made it through. They're also thinking big picture about how to attract new businesses and really shake things up. Case in point, the June 18th minutes mentioned something called the Downtown University Attraction and Retention Fund.
Okay, that sounds pretty official,
Yeah.
but also kind of awesome. I am intrigued. What's the strategy there?
It's actually a pretty smart move when you think about it. Universities bring a lot to the table economically. You've got students, faculty, staff all needing housing and food and services.
Right. Plus, universities attract research funding, and then you get startups popping up around them.
Exactly. It's like they bring their own little economic ecosystem with them. Suddenly, downtown isn't just for business people in suits. You've got students and professors and a much younger vibe.
Okay, I'm starting to see the appeal here. Instead of just being known as a tech hub, you've got this whole other energy.
Right. Think bookstores and cafes, late-night study spots that turn into music venues. It could be amazing.
Okay, you sold me on the idea.
Uh-huh.
But luring a university downtown, that's a long game, right? Not exactly a quick fix for the post-pandemic blues.
True. This is definitely a long-term investment, not a quick cash grab. But I think it shows that they're thinking strategically about the future.
And speaking of thinking strategically, no conversation about San Francisco is complete without talking about public safety. Am I right?
It's a big one.
It's a huge topic. And the June minutes show that the city is trying a bunch of different approaches to address it.
Oh, for sure. It's a constant balancing act.
So true. So let's talk about how they tackled this in the June 18th meeting, specifically in the Tenderloin neighborhood, because I thought this was fascinating.
Yeah, the Tenderloin is a really interesting case study.
For those who haven't spent much time in San Francisco, can you set the scene for us? What's going on in the Tenderloin that caught the supervisor's attention?
So the Tenderloin is a super densely populated neighborhood, and to be honest, it's been grappling with crime and quality of life issues for a while now. So the city is trying out this pilot program where they restrict late-night retail hours in the area.
Interesting. So are we talking things like liquor stores and corner stores, places that tend to attract trouble late at night?
Exactly. The idea is that by limiting their hours, you might reduce some of that late-night crime and make the streets feel safer.
Makes sense in theory, but I can also see this being pretty controversial. I bet business owners aren't thrilled about it. And then there's the whole question of whether it actually works to reduce crime.
You hit the nail on the head. It's a tough balancing act. And that's the challenge with so many of these issues. There's never an easy solution. You've got to weigh all these different needs and priorities.
Case in point, remember those entertainment zones we saw in the June 25th minutes? It feels like the complete opposite approach to the Tenderloin situation.
Right. It's almost like they're saying, hey, let's loosen things up and have some fun, but in a safe and controlled way. Basically, these zones would allow people to have open containers of alcohol during special events.
Okay,
Yeah.
so picture this. It's a beautiful San Francisco evening. There's a festival happening on Front Street, which is the first place they're proposing for these zones. And you can stroll around with a glass of wine in hand. Sounds kind of nice, right?
It does have a certain European flair, doesn't it? But of course, there are concerns about public intoxication and safety. The minutes do mention that these zones would require permits and security and insurance, but it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out in practice.
It seems like San Francisco is constantly trying to find that sweet spot, balancing fun and freedom with safety and order.
And that balancing act isn't just limited to these big picture issues like public safety or the economy. It comes up in all sorts of smaller decisions, too. Remember that whirlwind of ordinances and resolutions we talked about?
Oh yeah, don't even get me started on all those. MOUs with labor unions, vending regulations, liquor licenses. It was like scrolling through the city's giant to-do list.
I know it's a lot.
Was there anything in that mix that really stood out to you?
Honestly, it's the sheer variety that I find so fascinating. One minute, they're debating a street closure for a block party, and the next, they're discussing a multi-million-dollar contract. It really highlights the crazy scope of what local government deals with every single day.
And let's not forget about naming a street after Dr. Howard Thurman.
Oh, yeah, that's right. That was in the June 25th minutes, wasn't it? It's those little details that remind you that there are human stories behind all these official proceedings.
Speaking of human stories, I've been dying to hear what you think about something we briefly touched on earlier. The case of the missing supervisor.
Ah, yes. Supervisor Mandelman missing in action at the start of the June 18th meeting. It's a small detail, but it's those kinds of things that make these minutes feel less like dry documents and more like a window into the real lives of the people running our city.
Right. We've all been there, stuck in traffic, running late for something important. But in this case, it's the supervisor of District 8. It makes you wonder what happened. Was there some last-minute political maneuvering going on behind the scenes?
Now, wouldn't that be juicy? Unfortunately, the minutes don't give us any of those delicious details. They just state the facts: he was absent, then he arrived.
Exactly.
But it's definitely fun to imagine what might have happened.
It's like a tiny little political thriller tucked away in these pages. Okay, so we've got missing supervisors and late-night shopping restrictions and attempts to bring universities downtown. Is there any common thread here? What's the takeaway from all these seemingly random acts of government?
I think what's really interesting is that it's not always about some grand scheme or master plan. A lot of governing is about reacting to the need of the day, balancing competing interests and just trying to keep the city running smoothly.
It's like they're juggling a million things at once, all while trying to make everyone happy.
Exactly. And sometimes it's those smaller decisions, the ones that might not make the headlines, that have the biggest impact on people's everyday lives.
So while those big-ticket items like homelessness and the economy are obviously crucial, we shouldn't lose sight of the little things, the everyday decisions that really shape the city we experience.
100%. And honestly, that's why I think these meeting minutes are so valuable, even if they seem a little boring at first glance.
Yeah.
They give you that granular view of how decisions are made and how the city actually functions.
They're like the raw data of local democracy. Speaking of which, there was one other thing that caught my eye, something that speaks to the idea of citizens making their voices heard. Public comment. Remember those little sections scattered throughout? Short, but oh so San Francisco.
Right. You get into those weeds of hyperlocal issues, some wild stuff.
Seriously. For example, people showed up at these meetings to talk about AI, which, hello, very San Francisco. But then in the next breath, you've got folks advocating for expanded childcare support,
Yeah.
which is something that resonates way beyond the city limits.
Yeah, it just goes to show you how local government can be this amazing platform for such a wide range of issues.
Totally.
Yeah.
And those public comments, they're like a direct line to the people who are on the receiving end of all these decisions.
Exactly. They cut through all the official jargon and bureaucratic processes and remind you that there are actual human beings with real lives who are being impacted.
Right. These minutes aren't just some abstract document about budgets and ordinances. They're about real people trying to make their city a better place.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
And honestly, it makes you realize how important it is to pay attention to this stuff, to what's happening at the local level.
It's easy to get caught up in national politics, but these local decisions, they might seem small in comparison, but they have such a direct impact on your day-to-day life.
It's about the streets you walk down, the parks your kids play in, the businesses you support, the actual fabric of your community.
Exactly. And that brings us to something really important that I wanted to mention.
What's that?
Well, we've been talking about these meeting minutes for a while now and how fascinating they are. But it makes you wonder, are they actually accessible to the average person?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? I mean, we obviously love digging through them, but we're also total podcast nerds who actually enjoy this stuff.
We're a special breed for sure.
Would your average San Franciscan want to wade through all of this? Or even know where to find it?
Right. It's definitely a barrier.
Yeah.
And honestly, some of it can be a bit dense and jargon-filled. It's not exactly a light read.
Not exactly beach reading material.
And on top of that, not everyone has the time or the energy to try and decipher all these documents, even if they are available online.
That's so true. So it makes you think, how can we make this information more accessible? How can we make local government truly transparent?
Right. How do you get this information in front of the people who need it?
Exactly. I mean, could these minutes be presented in a more engaging way? Maybe with visuals or a glossary of terms or even just like a quick summary of the key decisions.
Now, those are some good ideas. I like where your head's at. It's about meeting people where they are and making civic engagement less intimidating and more appealing.
Because at the end of the day, an informed and engaged public is crucial for a healthy democracy.
100%.
It's all about making those connections right. And speaking of connections, I wanted to circle back to something we briefly touched on earlier. Those public comment sections sprinkled throughout the minutes.
Oh, yeah. Those little nuggets of gold.
Right. They're short, but man, they are pure San Francisco.
They're amazing. I love seeing what people choose to speak up about. It runs the gamut from hyper-local issues to stuff that's happening on a global scale.
It's true. Like we saw people bringing up concerns about AI, which, come on, that's peak San Francisco.
So true.
But then in the next breath, you've got folks advocating for better childcare support.
Yeah.
Which is something that affects families everywhere.
It really goes to show you how local government can be this platform for such a diverse range of voices.
Totally. And those public comment sections, they remind us that there are real people on the other side of every single one of these decisions.
Exactly. They bring it back down to earth. You get so caught up in the official language and the procedures, but at the end of the day, this is about people's lives.
Right. It's about real human beings with real families and real jobs and real concerns. These minutes, They're not just some document about numbers and regulations. They're about those human stories.
I love that. That's such a good point.
And it makes you realize just how important it is to pay attention to what's happening at the local level. Even if it doesn't always seem as exciting as national politics.
It's easy to forget about sometimes, but those local decisions, they really do have a direct impact on your day-to-day life.
It's about the parks you take your kids to, the schools they go to, the buses you take to work.
Exactly, the stuff that really shapes your community.
And that brings me to a bit of a dilemma that I've been wrestling with.
Oh, what's that?
Well, we've been geeking out over these meeting minutes for this whole episode,
do.
but it makes you wonder, how accessible is this information to the average person?
That's a really good question.
I mean, we're total podcast nerds.
Think for yourself.
We love digging through this stuff.
Yeah.
But would your average San Franciscan even know where to find these minutes, let alone want to read them?
That's the thing. They're not exactly user-friendly.
Right. They're not exactly page turners.
And even if you can find them and you want to read them, some of it is pretty dense and filled with jargon.
It's true. You practically need a dictionary to get through some of it.
It's a lot, and honestly, not everyone has the time or the energy to decipher all of that, even if they're super interested in local politics.
So true. So it makes you think, how can we do better? How can we make this kind of information truly accessible to the people it affects?
I don't know, but I think it's a conversation worth having.
Right. Could we present these minutes in a more engaging way? Maybe with some visuals or a glossary of terms, or even just like a TLDR at the top that summarizes the key decisions.
Ooh, a TLDIR. I love that idea. It's all about meeting people where they are.
Right. And making civic engagement less intimidating. Because at the end of the day, an informed and engaged public is the foundation of a healthy democracy.
100%. That's what it's all about.
And on that note, I think it's time to wrap things up for today.
This was fun. I always love a good deep dive.
Me too.